My name is Chris Drozdowski with Origin Lab Technical Support. I'll be hosting today's webinar on what's new in Origin 2021, an introduction to some of the new features. The topics we'll cover today is our new formula bar, our new color manager, our greatly improved Python support, we'll touch on that, our new Mini Toolbars, new graph types, and some new apps. Let's start with our formula bar. It's one of the important new features in Origin. It appears at the top of the user interface like in Excel. If you do not see it, you may need to activate a workbook and go to the View menu and choose Formula Bar. And when you do, you'll see it. It is similar to Excel in that it has an area for entering formulas or text, and it has a number of buttons. Essentially, the idea behind it is that there are certain areas in Origin where you have to enter formulas, and there's not a lot of space usually. Like in the f of x row for column level formulas or a cell for cell level formulas, there's not always a lot of space to enter the formula you want, especially if it's a complex formula. Oh, by the way, let me stop for a moment. I do have some colleagues that are listening in on the QA window and the chat window. If you have any questions or comments, you can put them there. We will also have a brief poll at the end of today's webinar. I would really like you to take the time to fill that out and let us know how we're doing. It helps us not only improve our webinars, but also improve our product if you have observations about our product. Well, let's get back to the subject. So the formula bar, it essentially allows us to enter these formulas in a central place, and it gives us all the room we need to enter them. It also has function lookup and insertion. If you aren't sure what function you need, you can use the formula bar. It also allows you to look at if you have large volumes of text in a worksheet, it allows you to more easily view that text. And let's look at an example. I have a worksheet here. It's sunspot data based on year. It's several hundred years of it. Well, maybe not. Yeah, several hundred years. And I want to take a moving average of this sunspot data. Let's see how we would do that. We're going to use a column formula, a set column values formula for our f of x. And when I enter that cell, my formula bar gets activated. And I want to find a moving average function. I don't know which one it is in Origin. So I can click on my f of x button. When I do, I get this search pop up, and let me search for moving average. And we have, let's see, we have one doesn't look right, the E moving average, the M moving average. I think our plain moving average is what I want, and I can click on this, and it will insert my function. And then from my function, I can hunt for my source. And it will place the column letter into my function. I can specify how many points backwards and how many points forwards I want. Then when I hit the enter key, it applies that function from the formula bar into the f of x. And we can see it did the calculation. Now that's a very short function. You may not need the formula bar for this, but sometimes we get very, very complex functions that call on functions, and you may have to end up dragging the column wider. Well, this removes that necessity to drag the column wider. Let's look at an example of using cell formulas. I have some data here. It's a comparison of medicine A and medicine B, and I've got 3 cell formulas I want to add at the bottom for each medicine. I've got the number of observations, the mean, and the standard deviation. And this is how we're going to do that. I highlight this cell where I want to put my formula. I'm going to go to my f of x bar, and I'm going to say equals count, and I'm going to open that parentheses. Then I can come in and hunt in my worksheet and select a range, close the parentheses, and hit enter. I get my formula. For the mean, I can come in here and do the same thing, mean. Hunt my data range, close, and hit enter. And the same for standard deviation. I'll enter S, I think it's STDDEV is my function, and hunt. And close the function. Now what I can do, since I have these cell functions here, these cell formulas, I can just drag them over to the next column, and they will get updated to reflect the next column. We can see here when I put my mouse into this cell, I can look in my formula bar and I can see the formula did automatically get updated. So those are two of the areas the formula bars are useful for set column values, column level formulas, and cell level formulas. I said earlier, this is also good for large passages of text. And let's take a look. I have a worksheet with some texts here. It's lorem ipsum text, but that's okay. I can see it's displayed here. I didn't have to enlarge my worksheet cell at all. In fact, I can make the formula bar bigger to display more. And then as I navigate through these texts, they get displayed. I can, of course, edit them here or just view them. And as you saw, this is resizable. You can use a system variable to choose a bigger or smaller font. I won't show you that today, but that is available. If you'll bear with me just a moment. We did have a question about the Python. By the way, I might not have mentioned this earlier. I'm going to briefly touch on Python in this presentation. At 2 o'clock in a couple of hours, we have an in-depth Python in Origin 2021 webinar. And it's worth, if you're interested in that subject, it is worth waiting and staying to watch that webinar. Let's look at our next area. Our next feature area, what we call the color manager. It is, we really wanted to, in Origin, come up with kind of a central location to manage palettes and color lists. Before they were kind of spread out. So we came up with the color manager for doing this, and let's take a look at some of its features. It is accessible in a number of ways. One of the primary ways, and I have got a trajectory, a contour trajectory plot here, and I want to change this background color map to a custom one based on some colors I found on the web. And let me show you how we can get to this color manager and how we're going to create a customized palette from the web. Let me adjust my screen a little bit, minimize some things if you don't mind. And this is the website I'm at. Let me adjust Origin a little bit more. I've come to this website. It's a government weather website, and I've got these different colors I use for wind chills and winter storm warnings and winter storm watches, and I want to apply them to my data here. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to select my plot by clicking in the graph, and I'm going to go to the palette toolbar button and click on it. And I have different palettes here. You know, I have temperature. I could maybe use my temperature palette. That one's already used. I could use a rainbow palette, but that doesn't really reflect what I want to show. I want to show this winter weather palette, and I don't have one. So I will go to the bottom of this palettes pop-up and choose more palettes. And this brings up my color manager. And I'll get into a little bit more of how this user interface works. But first, let's start by creating a new palette. And I get a little pop-up to build my color list. And part of this color list is an eyedropper. And when I select the eyedropper, I can move to whatever part of the current display, the color I want from the current display, and click it, and that will be brought into Origin. And I can replace the initial color. Then I can add another one. Add as new. And I'm just going to take a moment to come through here and do these. Add as new. Add as new. So I'm repeating this. and I'm building my palette. Once I've added a new, I need to give the palette a name. I'll just call it, let's call it my cold palette. It's going to say that as a palette file. And I can choose whether it's a color list or a palette. I'm going to use a palette here. I'm going to say, okay. So Origin has added this new palette, and it's to a list. This dialog has two lists. One on the left are the available palettes. I have these available. They may not show up in the GUI. And then I have a list of palettes on the right side. Those are the ones that will show up in the GUI. And we'll look at managing that here in a couple minutes. But let me say, okay. Now that I have my palette, my cold palette, I can click on it, and it will update my graph. Maybe we want to add more. We want to adjust this some. I'm going to double click and go into the plot details, and I'm going to adjust my palette here. Here's another option. I can go to my more palettes, scroll to the bottom, and I should be able to edit it and stretch it out to interpolate it. I forgot to interpolate it early, so I've come back from another location into the color manager. I've reopened my palette. Now I've interpolated it to 256. Now I can say, okay, okay. Reselect my palette, come through my dialogues, and it's gotten improved. So you can see how I created my own palette from the color manager. Now let's look at color lists. I can bring Origin, I can maximize it again now that I'm done with that website. Let's go ahead and reopen our palette editor. I mean, our color manager, pardon me. I can get to it from, let's see, how do we get to it here? We're going to go ahead and double click on the plot details dialog and come in here. Through my color lists, and I'm going to show you first how we can manage our either color lists or palettes here. As I said earlier, we have available ones on the left, and we have installed ones on the right. What if we don't want all these installed ones? What if we want to just reduce our list of color lists? I can just select them from the right and push them back onto the available on the left, and this is going to reduce my GUI. I can also go the other way, select a color list or palette on the left and push it into the selected for GUI list. And I can even move it up and rearrange my list here. I have some other options. I can come in and select a color list or palette, right click, and I can duplicate it. Then I can right click and I can edit it. Maybe I want to change one of these colors. I can give it its own custom name here. So we have all these options available from the color manager. But we also, let's say, for example, you created your own color list file. It's got the extension OTH, and it lives in your in a subdirectory of your user files folder. What if you've developed a color list that you want to share with other people? How can they bring that into Origin? And with color lists selected, we can also import from various files. You can do this with palettes or color lists. I'm going to show you with a color list. So I'll import from file, and I'm going to just navigate real quick to the directory for this webinar. And I have got a color list file. It was generated in Origin previously, and the color list is called My Color List. So I will double click on it, and they tell me it got installed. And I want to apply this color list to this pie chart. So I can select it here, just say okay. From my drop-down color list here, I can select it there and hit apply. And now we can see that I've brought in this color list that I previously created. Perhaps someone shared that with me, and it's come into my pie chart, though I see a little bit of an issue here that we need to work on. Let's look at one more area where the color manager is useful. Or actually our color editor app. That's one of our app plugins that comes with Origin. I don't know. The color editor doesn't come built into Origin. You have to download it, I believe, from the App Center. Let's go ahead and launch the app. And one of the things you can do, this is a pretty neat app, but one of the things you can do is you can pull in colors from an existing image. Let's see if we can find that image. I want to bring in images, the colors. Bear with me for a moment. The image is taking a moment to display. I want to bring in the colors from these contours. This was downloaded from an open source journal. I just want these colors. I'm not interested in anything else. And so that app will let us get these colors. The app will create a worksheet, and we have a number of options at the top, a number of different features. And one of them is to extract image colors. So I need to hunt down my image. I've got it. I need to specify how many colors there are in it. We've got 10 levels. Actually, this image only has 8, but the app makes you have a minimum of 10, and we can fix that in a moment. I will click OK, and Origin is it's taking a moment to do this because we're actually relying on our internal Python support now to scan that image for the colors. So it's brought these colors in, but there are a couple extra I don't want. I don't want the black color, so I'll select that row and right-click and delete it. I also don't want this really dark purple. We already have a purple that's a little nicer, so I'm going to remove it too by deleting the row. And when I do, I can see our color here, and I am going to save this as a palette. Do I want a color list or palette? That's a good question. I think we want a palette. And I'm going to give it a name, my second palette. Say OK. So the app has written out the palette file to our user files folder. And now let's go ahead and minimize this and get it out of the way. Now I have a graph here. I want to apply this palette to it. So let me click in the graph. And actually, this time I'll use our Mini Toolbar. I don't have to go anywhere else. I can come up to our Mini Toolbar and select the palette, my second palette, and there it applies it to the graph. It's as simple as that. I got an image I had downloaded from the web. I launched the app. I pulled the image colors in. I removed a couple of them, and I saved it as a palette, and then I applied the palette. So that's sort of the color manager, the color editor app. Now let's talk a little bit about Python. I'm going to close my script window now. Origin 2021 includes much more support for Python, more than we've ever had. It's supported in a number of areas. In the set column values formula, you can use it as a Python function. You can use Python-based fitting functions and import filters. You can use it behind buttons on graphs and worksheets to use a button to run some Python. You can call Python functions from LabTalk and Origin C, and I mean your own functions. Finally, you can run Python script you create from Code Builder. We also support downloading and installing pretty much all Python packages. We are going to have a webinar here this afternoon in a couple of hours that goes into detail about Origin and Python. But let me just show you a couple of examples. This first example is a set column values. I have it is a group statistics for a grouping column and some X and Y data sets. And then it shows my group means. Let me just open up my set values dialog. That's not what I want. I want it right here. We can look at our function. I don't know. Oh, wrong. Pardon me. Wrong column. All right, we're going to look and see here. We have new to our set values dialog. We've always had this before formula scripts. We have a Python function tab, and this is our Python function. It uses a pandas Python package, and it just does some group stats using data frames, and then I simply call that function from my before formula script. I can also call it directly from an f of x row. So that's a set column values function. We can also, as I mentioned, we can put our Python behind a button and a worksheet or a graph. In this case, it's a worksheet, and we can do some sort of analysis. For example, we're doing cluster regression, and I'll click this button and we'll run, and we can see that the analysis has been done. Let's look at our Python code. So here we have our code. My colleague built this. It's actually included in the product as an example. So that's a couple of examples of our new Python support. Y'all get to look at it a little bit later in depth. Now let's look at our new mini toolbars. Most of the new ones in Origin 2021. You'll pardon me for a second. All right, the first new mini toolbar is actually for date format columns, and I have a date format column here. I can click on the column header and I get my mini toolbar. A new button is over here. It is date. And when I select it, I can choose from all different kinds of formats. The current format seems to be day, day, month, month, year, year, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to change it around to month, day, year, year, hour, minute, second. So I can quickly change that. Before, this was a multi-step process, but now it's as simple as going to 1 click, 2 clicks. Oh, let's see, 3 clicks to change that date format. Let's look at some mini toolbars on graphs. A legend mini toolbar. I've got my legend right here. When I click in it, I have various options. I can change my font. We'll go to the classic Times New Roman here. I think I have too many fonts installed. I can change the text size. I can adjust the color if I want. I'll go back. I can change whether do I want to show a frame or not. No frame. With frame. I have some other options. I can do that reconstruct occasionally. Occasionally you have to rebuild a legend. And when you do that, original rebuild it. In this case, I didn't. But sometimes you do. I can choose what I want to show in my legend. Usually it's that comment or long name. But in this case, I can change maybe to the data range if I wanted. Or the user parameter, which I don't have one, or maybe the column short name. So from right here, I can do this. Let's look at some other features. I'm going to go back and change that back to, let's see, that switches the order. I want to go back and change that back to the use comments front line. I have some other options. I can arrange it horizontally if I want. Or I can come back, and in this case, it would look better vertically, of course. And let's see, what else do we have on here? I'm not sure about the attached to plots, but I do have the wrap text. So I enabled that, and that means when I make it a little smaller, the text of the legends will wrap. So that's our legend mini toolbar. Now let's look at a pretty nifty other mini toolbar, and this is for the tables on graphs. the graph table. As you know, when you do some sort of fitting, usually it's a fitting, you end up, if you want, having a table put on the graph. And let's look at how we can make this maybe a little more attractive. I'll select the table. In fact, let me come out here on the edge and select it. And what options? I have table styles. We have various options there, like row headers. If we want to show, we don't really want to show these usually like this. By the way, with Mini Toolbars, I think it pretty much all the time you have your Control-Z undo with the actions you take from Mini Toolbars. So if you do something you don't like, you can always just undo it. We can do things like specify maybe fill color. I'll do gray, and gray is going to be too dark, but we'll come back and we'll customize it. Come down. Maybe we just want to customize for a real light gray. We have other options, including banded rows. This is also called zebra striping. You can specify a banded row color if you want to help your table to read it a little better. Let's specify the banded row color. Let's go in and customize again. We'll make it a little bit lighter. So we have banded rows. We also have increasing border widths. We can, of course, change our font, just like we did with the legend. Increasing, decreasing, increasing font size. I don't like that border so big, so let's reduce it. So there we can customize that table really, really easily with that Mini Toolbar. Now let's look at one last Mini Toolbar, and this is for the axis tables. We can select inside our table and do things like change a fill color. Maybe we want to give it a fill color. Let's use one of those grays that I recently defined. So we have a fill color there. We could change the text color. We could make it bold if we wanted to. That's not so good. We have other options. We can move rows up or down, as the case may be. We can even do things like, let's look and see what else we can do. We could rotate if we want. In this case, it's not so useful, but there are times when it's useful to rotate them. Pardon me. We can hide rows. We can even move rows. Switch positions. We can move to the opposite axis and see it came up on the top now. So that's our other major Mini Toolbar improvement. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our new graph types. So I'm just going to show you these graphs right now. For the new graph types and the new apps, I'm just going to show you. I'm not going to step through creating them in the interest of time. Our first new graph type is a chord diagram. It's the primary use of chord diagrams is to show the flow or connections between several entities. Each is represented by a fragment on the outside along the circumference of the circle, and arcs are drawn between the entities to show flow. This is a very popular infographic type of visually pleasing type of chart, and we had a lot of requests for them, so we implemented them. And here's one example for world's top exporting countries, and we can see the entities, the nodes, and we can see the flows, the ribbons of the flows. And here's another, a little bit simpler one. So those are two chord diagram examples. We also have a lollipop plot. Yeah, a lollipop plot is a hybrid between a scatter plot and a bar plot, and it shows generally, this version shows the relationship between two different numerical variables. In this case, we've got some GDP growth for the year 2009 and 2019, and our graph designers here in Origin, I borrowed this graph from them. They did a really good job on this because not only are we seeing the 2009 and the 2019 data points, but they've been able to calculate which is the increase and decrease range. It's a very attractive graph. So that is a lollipop plot. Now let's look at a polar vector plot. We saw a vector plot earlier, actually. In fact, I've got two of them. We saw back on our at the very beginning, this is a classic Origin vector plot. It's X, Y, it's a Cartesian vector plot. But now we have vector plots for polar coordinates too. Here you can see the vectors along a polar coordinate and they're color mapped. We have another example. Here is a similar one. It's the polar vector coordinates. It's only kind of got that half circle though. It's the electron transitions for the classic hydrogen atom electron transitions. The different series that we all learned about when we took Gen Chem back in the day. But instead of doing it in an XY coordinates fashion, we decided to do this in the radial fashion. In the polar, the polar radial fashion. Let's look at another new graph type. The browser graph was a graph we introduced in a previous version of Origin. It's really designed for quickly looking through multiple data sets that are very similar. So we improved upon that and created a stacked browser graph. The stacked browser graph is based on some sort of grouping information, and let's take a look at that. I have got a worksheet here. It's got columns based on percentages of a certain substance, and it's got a grouping column here. It's got a grouping information in my comments. So what I can do is I can come in. I'm going to select my worksheet and go to Plot, Browser, and choose a stacked browser plot. And Origin, when I get there, Origin is going to ask me, how do I want to group it? And I'm going to group it by those comments. And let's look at a preview. So I get a preview of the data. I can actually, this is another improvement. I can choose my legend. What do I want my legend to be? And I'm going to choose the long name for my legend and say, okay. When I do this, I get that browser graph that you saw. All my data sets are highlighted, but I can look through simply, maybe I can go through the arrow key with them. I can also hold down my shift key and show the increasing values, and you can see my legend is updating. I, of course, similar to the other browser graphs, I have options for selecting, for example, every fifth one, or maybe every nth one where n equals 3. So we still have those browser graph options. We're just in stacked panels now. Okay, so those are our new graph types. Let's take a quick look, just an overview of some of the new apps. Before I get into the three, I'm just going to just show you. Let's open our App Center and do this. We're going to search for, we should be able to search for 2021 to find the 2021 apps. I guess not really. We'll clear our search. I always mix that up. You'll have to pardon me. And we'll do minimum version 2021, and we'll look at some of these apps. Neural network regression we have. I'll just show you real quickly about that. We have an optimization solver. We have an HTML report assistant, a periodic report. We can now import data from PDF tables, and we have other ones like Taylor diagrams, apparent integration, rank models by fit reports. I'll show you an example of that today, and a number of other ones. We have we have some new data connectors. We're constantly adding new data connectors. As we find out how to import new third-party files, we add data connectors for them. So let me just talk a little bit about 3 of the new apps. Let's look at our neural network regression. It's a tool for fitting data with neural network backpropagation. It trains a neural network to map between a set of inputs and output. You can use it to predict the response of independent variables. We already have it run a couple times. This is a Python-based app, by the way. Its engine behind the origin front end is Python. We've already done a 2-peak fitting here. We can see our fitting report that the app has generated. It's like a typical fitting report in Origin for the most part. It's got our input data. It's a little different. It doesn't really do parameters in the same sense, but we get our usual residual plots, that sort of thing. We get our regression. It can also do multiple linear regression. And here's a report from some where it's performing the multiple linear regression data. The optimization solver app allows you to do different things. It can be used to find solutions that minimize or maximize a function defined in a worksheet cell. You can use it for curve fitting by defining residual sum of squares as a target function for minimization. I am totally unfamiliar with this, but I'll show you. We have options to minimize functions in worksheets. We have an option to fit a Gaussian peak. Maybe we want to do fit convolution. This app does all this. It even does global fitting. These are alternatives to other ways of doing it. We can even choose to minimize a Python function with this app. Finally, let's look at one more app, our rank models by fit reports. Many of us do fitting in Origin, and we get data sets and we wonder what is the best fitting function for this data set. So with some a priori knowledge, I knew my data here. Let's take a quick look at the data. It's some sort of exponential decay, and Origin has a number of different exponential decay functions, but mainly a single term, a 2-term, and a 3-term function. So beforehand, I've gone ahead and fit them, and I've got 3 reports. This is for a single term, fit in L1, fit in L2 is for 2 terms, and fit in L3 is for 3 terms. I already have my reports made, so since I've already done the fitting, let's go ahead and use this app to rank them. Let me go to my App Center, and I'll choose Rank Models by Fit Reports. And we're going to compare 3 models today. I'll say OK. Let me select them. Let's just choose that as the first one. We'll choose the fit in L2 as the second and the fit in L3 as the third. And when I click OK, Origin does the comparison. It determines the AIC, the BIC, the adjusted R-square, the reduced chi-square, and the residual sum of squares. And it is able to tell you, you can read about more how it does this. It's able to tell you which is decided is based on these outputs, which is the best fitting function. In this case, it's a 2-term exponential decay. Okay, this kind of is wrapping up my presentation. We're going to go ahead and do a poll now. I want for about 5 minutes. Love it if you take a few minutes to fill it out and let us know how we're doing. I hope today's presentation, it was a little bit brief. It was more of an overview. I hope that was okay with you. I hope this piques your interest in Origin 2021. And as a reminder, we're going to have another webinar here at 2 o'clock. That's about an hour and 20 minutes from now. That is going to go in depth about our Python support in Origin 2021. Again, I urge you to go to our social media, especially our blog. The blog is going to go into detail about all these new features that I've talked about in Origin 2021. If you want to learn more about how to use Origin, I suggest you go to YouTube and watch our videos. It's a great way to learn the product. As a review of what we looked at today, we started with the formula bar. Then we looked at the color manager and we created a palette. We loaded a color list. We used that color editor app to get the colors from an image and then apply that to a graph. We talked briefly about Python, and I showed you some of our new mini toolbars. Then I showed you the chord diagram, the lollipop plot, the polar vector plot, and finally the stacked browser graph. Then we talked about the new apps. I briefly mentioned that neural network regression app. I just said we had the optimization solver app. And finally, I showed you how to use a rank models by fit report apps. So we've got about 3 minutes left on our poll. I'm just going to hang out. My colleagues are hanging out if you have any questions. And other than that, have a nice afternoon. Thank you.